This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Liz Colburn, host of The Morning Uplift here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come back and check out my show, The Morning Uplift, where we talk about finding your beauty in the journey. A new show comes out twice a month on the first and third Mondays. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Morning Uplift. Thank you again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy and you probably are too. This is Emily and I'm here today with Lindsay and we're here to talk nerdy to you. We are dedicating this episode to Stan Lee, who passed away on November 12th of this year, and it was kind of hard to miss it. Few people were able to ignore his death, and as an iconic American comic book writer, editor, publisher, every single one of the geeks and nerds we so very much love felt kind of like a shockwave of losing him. And he was 95 years old, which was pretty awesome. He was about to turn 96 so in this month he would have been 96. And he lived a very long and influential life. Though there's always something to be said about what a man had yet to do, Stan Lee definitely left a mark on the United States in ways that are sure to continue for many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read actually, as far as when he was talking about his cameos, he said he wanted to continue to do them until he couldn't anymore. We all know his Easter egg cameos that are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and other places as well, that I had no idea about. I had no idea he was like in just all kinds of fun little things that he's been doing for such a long time. Just that thought it was so cool to his work ethic that he was 95 years old and still giving us our little...
Well, I watched a documentary to kind of prepare for this episode, and there's like a snippet of an interview with somebody, and the interviewer asked, "Will you ever retire?" And he said, "Retiring is a dirty word. I'm never going to retire. Retiring is what people do when they want to do what they've always wished they could do when they were working." And he said, "I am doing what I want to do every single day." I'm like, that's really cool.
I also heard something he said about, you hear it from different motivational speakers all the time, but I was noticing there's a lot of motivational speaking going on in a lot of Stan Lee's interviews, and one of them really struck me because I've heard it several times before, but it said, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Yes.
We've heard that a million times, but hearing it from Stan Lee was kind of jarring as well. Just the same thing, you retire so that you can go do whatever it is you wanted to do your whole life. But he had been doing it for such a long time that it didn't make sense to stop. You just keep on doing it.
Right. He wasn't even doing it necessarily for the money of it or to do something with his time. He was doing it because he loved it and that was his passion.
Right. But when in my research as well, I thought it was very interesting that he grew up very poor. His family was continually moving, but he grew up very poor. His father was a trained dressmaker, but wasn't able to find work, was continually unemployed. They had his little brother, and they ended up having to move to a smaller apartment. It was something that really stuck with him from his childhood, that his parents were continually trying to figure out how they were going to make next month's rent. And it was very jarring to him. He said continually that the one thing he never wanted to be was unemployed. And a lot of work ethic and his desires in his life centered around not wanting to ever have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm. And then when he was going to marry his wife, who passed away last year, so it's kind of a a parallel thing, like she passed away last year, now he passed away this year. When he married her, He was one of the guys that very chivalrous in nature, especially along with the time period where they did get married. And he said, no wife of mine is ever going to have to work. And so he wanted to be that breadwinner for the family, even though she had marketable skills too. She was an actress and a singer, among other things. And he said, well, I'm the husband and I'm the one that's going to take care of the family. And so that's just who he was.
Yeah, I thought it was just so cool to hear that. Chivalry was definitely not dead with him.
Not at all.
I felt a little bad that it took us almost a month to get this episode together. He's been gone for a little while, and there's been so much media and so much information out there about him that I really had to take some time and look into what I wanted to say about this man, because I had a few friends who didn't know anything about him, or they knew some not so great stuff about him, which is just weird. I really wanted to make sure that we were able to do him justice in this one. So apologize to everybody that it took us almost a month to talk about it.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to do it a lot sooner, but there was so much information that we wanted to sort through and, like you said, do him justice and, give him the respect that the nerd world deserves for him.
Right. So we do know that his cause of death was cardiac arrest. Although, old age, really, I found it really hard to be sad, honestly, because he was 95 years old and he had so much that he gave us already.
Yeah. Not to say that he wouldn't have given any more, because he probably would have, but what he already did give is so fantastic. Like, we can't imagine what else he could have brought. So, like, he had a very full and long life.
So he started out his career kind of with this job that there's all kinds of different myths and legends about how he started working in comics. And there's stories about whether or not the job was given to him because some relative had a job at a publishing company, and then he's also said something about looking for jobs to work in a publishing company in a classified ad, and he had just forgotten that he really had a relative in there. So, it's kind of a part of where the stories make the truth. And he even, joked that he had been telling the story for so long that he just believed it, that he just made it real. And it was interesting because in one of the interviews that I had read, the transcript too, he said that someone was talking about making a movie about him. And, kind of like the Mr. Rogers ones that have come out recently. And he said, I don't know why they would want to make a movie about me. I've never done anything, I've never gotten in any trouble. I married my wife, and we were married for 57 years. And, he was just so humble about it. And that's one of the really cool things too, is when he was doing Stan's Soapbox, and when he was doing all of the letters that he would send out to readers and people who would send him letters, he was always giving credit where it was due. I know there's a lot of talk about Jack Kirby and whether or not certain artists are credited with the correct amount of creation that they did, but I think it's very important that he was always saying this was collaborative. We did this together. Mm-hmm. The artists and we did all of this. He was known for jumping on tables and showing what he wanted a fight scene to look like and stuff like that. So I think it's really cool that he had this limitless energy that he seemed to have. We know that he enlisted himself in the Army when World War II was happening. He couldn't just stand by and let that happen without being a part of it, which I thought was so... I almost sort of feel like some of my favorite superhero characters are a part of Stan Lee at this point, because it's one of those things that I always loved about Captain America. So he went and he enlisted himself. He tested top of the IQ boards, I think, if I remember reading that correctly. And he ended up doing some really cool stuff in the Army. Did you get to hear any of that?
So what I learned from the documentary that I saw, which was, if anybody's interested, it's actually on Amazon Prime, called Stan Lee with Great Power. So you can check that one out. It's only like it's like an hour, 20 minutes. So it's not super long. It was very well put together. There's a lot of Stan Lee talking, which made me really respect the documentary itself, because it's him giving his own account.
Right.
It was just kind of put together by the people who did the documentary. So what the documentary showed was that when he was enlisted, his title was a playwright, and he was one of like 9 American playwrights in the service at that time. And what his like main job was to do like instructional pamphlets and flyers and that sort of thing for the troops, so that they could learn different things depending on what they needed to do, like training materials and that sort of thing. And I think, if I remember correctly, another playwright that was in the Army at the same time was Dr. Seuss. But I don't think they were in the same location. They were probably in different places, but they did, I guess, kind of the same job.
Oh.
And so that's kind of interesting as well.
Especially when you think of the drawings that we've seen associated with both of those men. Like it's very different styles. I could see those as training materials sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you can tell they're kind of from the same time period.
Yeah. Well, and did Dr. Seuss actually draw in his books? I don't know.
I honestly don't know. Maybe we should investigate and do an episode on Dr. Seuss, because he's a cool dude too.
When I think about it, there's a whole lot of like pictures of who's that are walking in a line, and I always thought that was like such a cool effect. I wonder if that came in use in a.
I bet. Yeah, I don't know.
Training pamphlets. I don't know.
Yeah.
But he also, so he worked for Timely Productions or Publications or whatever their name was. It was so funny because they kept saying Timely, and I was like,
yeah,
Timely?
and like
Stanley?
What?
But he worked for a man with the last name Goodman, so it ended up going from Timely Productions to Goodman Publications or something like that. And
yeah,
I hate to say it because like I also read. You got to watch that awesome documentary, and I listened to a book on Audible called Stanley, the Man Behind Marble by Bob Batchelor. And it's a really amazing book, but they do repeat a lot of things just to kind of drive it home about this man and what his life was like. So it's really cool to know that there was just driving forces behind everything he did. But when he was in the Army for World War II, he was still working for Timely Productions at that time as well. So he was going to, they would send him information in his mailbox, and he would work over the weekend to get whatever he was doing for the publications out in a timely fashion, not to punish.
That's actually really cool of him to do, because he wouldn't have had to do that. Like he obviously just wanted to.
Well, and he had someone who was working for him in the interim too. So someone was there filling his spot, but he still had that driving force behind him that he was still part of this production. So he had to continue in the ways that he could. But there's this legend that he ended up one time being told that there was nothing in his mailbox for him, and when he went to go check on it himself, there was something in there for him from Timely, and he asked the guard to let him get the mail, and they said no, and then he ended up like using some kind of tool to get the hinges off of it so he could get at it. And when they decided to try and reprimand him, one of the leading officers was like, nope, you guys messed up. He was just getting his work done. So it was really,
wow.
It was I liked that story.
Something I think is really interesting as you look at Stanley's career is like, so he started with writing comics and making comics like kind of in the beginning, like when comics were new, he was in it. And then it kind of transitioned to cartoons, and he was taking some of the same characters that he made in comics and was putting them into cartoons, like the Spider-Man and Spider-Man and Iron Man and X-Men, I think, even, and then he was making cartoons out of those kind of characters. And then eventually when the internet became a big thing, he transitioned to a web company that made comics online. And ended up having 2 different companies because the first company had some issues with some people being shady, and I don't think he had anything to do with the shadiness. So
No, he
he started.
was found to not have
Yeah,
been
it was
involved at all.
somebody that kind of wanted to start it with him, and they lied about stuff, and so it wasn't his fault at all. So he ended up creating a new company called POW Media, and that was the one that lasted online. And now, you know, his big thing has been his characters becoming movies on the big screen with live action people. And he's like, if you would have told me when I was a kid writing these characters that I was going to see them live on a big screen someday, you would have thought I was crazy.
Right. And when he was growing up, let's backtrack a little bit though too. When he was after the Army, there was this weird stigma with the comic book writers and artists, because there was this weird I think we've had the same kind of thing in our lifetime with video games.
Oh yeah,
where the powers that be think that they had something to do with delinquency in children.
Yeah, like there's some form of something out there in the world that's contaminating our youth, and they're becoming more and more degenerate because of some such thing. And that time in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was comic books. Well, now apparently it's video games, and there's always going to be something that they have to blame.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember in the documentary I watched, that really caused Stan Lee and all of his co-workers a lot of hardship when they were trying to write their comics, because he said it ended up making a lot of bland storyline and a lot of bland drawing and a lot of stuff that they didn't enjoy.
Right, there was a regulation that you had to put a stamp of approval and a rating from, was it the MPAA, that certain children, just like with the movies, that's also just a bogus rating system.
Right, kind of a generic, like, these are the things that qualify for this certain rating.
And then there's a story as well that they wanted. Stan Lee was always using this medium for kind of like social progress. He talked about intolerance and racism, and acceptance. And when you look at it, we could talk forever about it. But I think it's interesting that a lot of times you just think, oh, Stan Lee, yeah, he wrote comic books and worked with,
and that was it.
Iron Man and Superman, and not
right.
Oh, I misspoke. Spider-Man and
oops, yep, I heard it. Nope.
So he, generally speaking, that's what people think. But reading all of this, I think it's really cool that he used this medium to instigate social change. I think that's like the coolest thing ever, to talk about acceptance and things like, if you look into the X-Men and the essays I could write, like,
yeah, seriously though, and the essays that have been written, to be honest, like there are probably so many essays using Stan Lee's work as a great example of how to incorporate big ideas and show them to people in a way that makes sense to them.
Right.
How to make an example for tolerance of anybody. Like that's kind of he said his idea behind the X-Men was like, this is how people treat people who are different, but the X-Men treated everyone the same because they realized that everybody's different in certain ways. Sort of like
even where he was going to with his, he had that sign-off thing, so he was doing face front and Excelsior. Yeah,
Excelsior was his thing. Yeah, but he pick like a whole bunch of different ones from time to time.
He was always looking. Yep, enough said. He was looking for a sign off. Like he was really looking for something that was his. And he ended up going with Excelsior, which I thought was really cool.
It is.
And what was that? So it was a Latin word that meant ever upward. And isn't that like the coolest thing?
It's awesome. And it's not something you hear all the time. It reminds me of like the Sword and the Stone. Wasn't that sword called Excelsior or something like that?
Excalibur.
I don't know. Excalibur. That's why it makes me think of it though. But anyways, like it's a cool word in general,
Well, yeah, and you said he had hang loose, face front, enough said, and those were all like other things that the competition was also using to the things that you had to sign off as, but even we here with Beauties and Headcanons, we talk nerdy to you, and
Right. Yeah.
I've heard and I've seen signs and stuff that say that as well, but that's kind of what we've adopted. And I think that's really cool that he, we always try to see what other people are doing and come up with something that's our own. And that's basically what he was doing with Excelsior. So I thought that was really neat.
Yeah.
There is a
I
day
love it.
sometime when he was going to turn 96, they're talking about at some time at some on that date, everyone's going to stop and shout Excelsior. And I thought that was, I think it's probably, maybe it's just something I read, but
I don't know
I'm
either.
totally going to look it up and do it. He went from working for this publishing company with Goodman, doing basically what everybody else had told him to do. So Goodman said, follow the money, do what makes money, copy them. They know what they're doing. They're selling. We need to sell too. And so they spent
Right.
so much time with Stan Lee following the market and doing what everyone else was doing and being so terribly unhappy with that.
For like a long time, DC Comics was the big comic company.
Right. And he talked about how, he continued to do that because he was so petrified of being unemployed like his father had been.
Yeah.
So he, continued to say, okay, I've got to do what my boss says to do because I can't go against him because I can't lose this job. This is my life. This is my livelihood. And he had to continue to support his family. So he continued to do that. At some point, though, he ended up being so unhappy that he was either going to quit or he had to do something drastic. And he had this idea in his head that he wanted to write a comic that he would want to read. And that ended up being a collaboration, as far as I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. And again, I'm only human. So I had this book read to me and did my own research, and you watched the documentary and did your own research. And so we really wanted to bring this together and do our best to talk about Stan Lee. And I think it's very important that, I just mentioned that I can get facts wrong. I'm really good with that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I thought it was really cool that he decided to collaborate eventually with Jack Kirby, who they had a falling out before because Jack Kirby and an associate were working for DC Comics and for what would end up being Marvel with Goodman earlier. So they ended up being asked to leave because they were moonlighting for DC as well, which is probably one of the reasons why there was so much doubling of the characters. When you do research on Green Arrow, there's also Iron Fist that seems a lot like Green Arrow. And so I've always, there's so many things where we know that this DC character is a lot like this Marvel character, and
and it kind of had to be that way for a little while
because that's kind of just where the market was going. That's what that's what the people wanted. So they were just trying to do it. And I get it too. You want to make sure you're making money and you want people to read what they're going to read. So if you have an allegiance to DC Comics, you're going to read DC Comics. If you have an allegiance to Marvel or to Stan Lee or to whoever was publishing at the time, then that's what you're going to read. But he ended up collaborating after wanting to go ahead with a different illustrator or artist, but the work wasn't what he wanted. And Jack Kirby had this way of being able to create exactly what was in Stan Lee's head.
I'm going to pause you there because what I saw in With Great Power, the documentary, was that when Stan Lee wanted to go his own way, he did ask Jack Kirby at first, and he had him try a couple times, and he was like, that's not quite what I want to see. Sorry, I'm going to have to check and see if someone else can help me with this. And, they kind of amicably parted at that point because, Stan was looking for something very specific. And then he got in touch with a guy named Steve Ditko. And Steve Ditko did the animation or the artistry for like Spider-Man.
Oh, okay.
And that's how that got started, I think, when Stan Lee was starting to do like branch out on his own. And that was one of the big parts where he very specifically called himself a co-creator of Spider-Man with Steve Ditko. Right. He even wrote up an official memo to make sure that Steve got his proper recognition, that Stan didn't only create Spider-Man and then Steve just kind of drew it. Like, they both came up with the concept, because the pictures are just as important as the concept.
Right.
Without the pictures, the concept can be anything anybody wants, but the pictures make it solid in someone's mind. So to Stan Lee's perspective, like, they were equals in it, which
Right.
is really, really fantastic.
Yeah, and there was a lot of time he spent making sure that the right credit went to the right place.
Yeah, exactly. He really wanted to make sure that everyone who participated in it, whether they just wrote in the lettering on the comics or if they came up with a concept for the story, every single person that had something to do with it was credited on that comic. And that was kind of new, because in the beginning with comics, there was really no recognition for anybody except for the publisher.
Right.
And he wanted to make sure every person who had an important play on a comic or on a hero or on a character, they got recognition for that. And that's awesome.
I was originally talking about the Fantastic Four, and that was Jack Kirby.
Okay, yeah. Yep.
That was the first thing he did when he branched off from what he was looking for. So it was the first time that he made humans that had a superpower, and that whole story was collaborated on with Jack Kirby. Going forward, though, Spider-Man happened, and that was with Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And
gotcha. Yeah, and also Doctor Strange was with Steve
right,
as well.
Right, because it's a different style, so I totally get it.
Yeah.
It's really cool that he was able to give the proper credit to them, and all you have to do is like look up Fantastic Four artist, and sure enough, it's Jack Kirby. And if you look up the Spider-Man collaborators, and that's definitely out there the way it should be, which is really neat.
Exactly.
It was cool too, because I think Stan Lee actually talked about Spider-Man being his like his autobiography.
Yeah, because I mean, there's so many memes out there now that's like, Stan Lee as in the Spider-Man costume, because he kind of identified as Peter Parker a little bit.
Yeah.
And sort of took on, he wrote himself into that character more than anybody else, any of his other characters, it seemed like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think it's important that at some point in time he went from creating these super heroes that were of another world, that had otherworldly superpowers, to humans with awesome power. And that's where the title of your documentary comes from too. At the end of one of the I think that one of the very first Spider-Man issues.
Yeah, the one where we get, it gives Spider-Man his call to action. Like, why would Spider-Man be a hero?
Right, because he had that run-in with the thief that eventually killed his uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that comic, it says, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Right.
And that right there was Peter Parker's and Spider-Man's call to be a hero, rather than what he had been doing, which was just using his newfound superpowers to get money.
Right. To be a show.
Exactly. And so he instead changed his mindset to be responsible and use his powers for that responsibility of the greater good.
I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of the quotes that we have heard from Stan Lee. And there is a beginning intro that I didn't even realize was Stan Lee's voice in The Defenders. And he talks about the Defenders, and a lot of his other superheroes were centered around being humans and being in New York. Different parts of New York, Hell's Kitchen and all the different places. But it really made a tangible thing for these people to be able to read. You could imagine walking down this street in New York, and these characters that you were reading about would also be able to walk down those streets. And I thought that was really cool that was the first time that was done, because with other characters, Gotham wasn't a place that anybody could go walk in. Metropolis wasn't something people could go to, and so it's a very different feel to make these people so very human. And that was one of the cool things about the Defenders intro was he says, and I quote, "They are the greatest stories ever told. Heroes show us that we don't need to be perfect to do what's right. It's not about living without fear, but facing injustice. It's not about being powerful, but finding your calling. When you least expect it, they show us it's okay to be vulnerable. No matter how tough you are, they remind us, even though they are heroes, they're still human."
I like that at the end. Even though they are heroes, they are still human.
Yep.
Like, they're going to make mistakes. There's going to be things that happen where they don't know what to do. And they have to make important decisions.
That's what's been so interesting to me watching the reimagined shows that I've been watching lately, that these people have this great power, this great responsibility. It's very it's an underlying continuance with what I'm seeing, Daredevil and Jessica Jones, and not being able to stand by and let things happen, but simultaneously being flawed and being human and having your demons and having to work through those too. And that's really something that I think Stan Lee was excited to bring to all of his characters.
The relatability, I think, is very real with almost all of his characters. In one way or another, there's somebody that can relate.
It tells us about ourselves, it brings those demons, it makes it, I keep saying relatable. It makes it relatable. It's just, you can learn a lot from someone like Stan Lee, who can show you these superheroes that you wouldn't ever think you'd be able to find anything in common with, and work through your demons too because of how they work through theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a couple other things we wanted to talk to about Stan Lee. I think about a year ago, you and your previous co-host, Erica, talked about the cameos that Stan Lee
We did.
And
yes, it was our 6th episode ever of Beauties and Headcanons, and here we are in episode 71 now, which feels crazy. But yeah, it was a little over a year ago in early September last year when we talked about where in the Marvel Universe is Stan Lee. So if you are interested in our very detailed account of that, you can go ahead and check that episode out. However, I can give you the main bullet points right here. The first thing we talked about was that someone on Reddit, of course, Reddit is full of people and their theories and ideas and their ways to make connections, connecting the dots in different ways, which is really cool. It's a great thing about Reddit. But sometimes some of them are a little kooky. The one that we came across, which is interesting, is that Stan Lee is playing the same man in all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe cameos, and his life just keeps getting ruined by superheroes. It's just like every time he moves to a new place in the world or he gets a new job, somehow superheroes just kind of ruin it for him, and so he has to go do something different. Like in Thor, where he's got his big pickup truck and he's trying to pull Thor's hammer out of the ground, and he rips his truck in half. Like, oh great, I just got a new one too. Come on. Or he gets radioactive poisoning because he drank the soda that came from Bruce Banner's experiment gone wrong. Right. Like things like that. Or he gets mistaken for Hugh Hefner by Tony Stark, and then later on he calls Stony Stark Stony. He calls him Stony Tank. Or Tony Stank, which might be one of my favorite cameos.
But we do know that theory has been debunked.
That theory's not. We do know, though, that our other theory that we discussed last year has been essentially proven and confirmed by Marvel that Stan Lee was Uatu, the Watcher of Earth's multiverse. And so the Watchers were a type of race, a species of aliens that was in the Marvel Universe, created by Stan Lee and his co-creators. And there's tons of other sources that have alluded to this theory as well, like NerdSync that we talked about, Super Kylan Brothers, Bustle, Marvel, DC Explain, a bunch of YouTube videos, and the Bustle website. And now I also saw on Inverse.com an article from April 2017 that said, just confirming that Stan Lee was the same character in every single one of his cameo appearances. And so that and then at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, they showed him as one of the Watchers, Uatu. And so we can basically assume, yeah, he's Uatu. And the only one I'm having issue with is that his cameo in Big Hero 6, he was Fred's dad at the very end of Big Hero 6. I don't know how that connects to this
thing. They also talk about multiverses. And so a multiverse is how there are different universes where the same person can be different and still the same. So in your episode with Erica, you guys also talked about that, how, that's how there are so many different versions of Spider-Man. Because there's, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and then there's...
And Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Yeah, okay.
So,
and there's even a movie about that now, too, Into the Spider-Verse, which I've heard is very good.
But what I think is interesting, too, is they really cover that with the whole Watcher theory, because Watchers are able to watch all the universes simultaneously. And Uatu is known for watching Earth, and he basically favors humans. So he might have...
Sounds like the Doctor.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So he may have done quite a lot less watching than he was supposed to do. So it sounds like he might have gone against the Watcher rule and just look, don't touch. It sounds like he's been touching it a whole lot.
I see.
Driving a truck around, trying to pick up Thor's hammer, drinking Bruce Banner's juice, that stuff. So I think it's interesting that they even kind of, they covered it, that it fits.
Yeah.
It's okay. And I think it's kind of cool that we've still got a little bit of Stanley left to see in the cameos too. Posthumously, that those will be in those movies.
They were... Yes, because they were previously filmed before he passed away. So there are, I think, 3 more cameos that are to come out yet. The most upcoming one being the one in Captain Marvel, coming up in March, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I hear is a good one. Or wait, is it Avengers 4 I hear is a good one? I don't know.
Let's be serious, they're all good ones.
They're all good ones. Although I think... the Big Hero 6 one was probably my favorite just because of the way he did it. It was great. Anywho, so Captain Marvel, then Avengers 4, and then Spider-Man Far From Home. I think those are the next 3. And then we won't have any more actual recorded Stan Lee appearances. Although I do like the thought that's going around that there should be like a portrait of Stan Lee in the upcoming movies after that. That would be a great tribute to him.
Yeah. I think just like pictures on a wall in the background would be good. I don't think I want them to try and recreate anything more than that, but I think having him there, but also just still kind of watching.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way to include his memory, but also not try too hard and do like a ton of CG, because everyone's going to know it's CG if it's after those ones,
right?
And I have a feeling it would probably cause a lot of people to not enjoy it as much if it were that way.
I wanted to also mention Stan Lee hadn't wanted to do comic books. He wanted to write the Great American Novel, and I think it's interesting when we look at all of his body of work, his life, and the way he chose to live and the marks that he left. His life was kind of the Great American Novel, the American dream, and everything that he did. It might not have necessarily been in words in a novel, but it definitely was still written by him, and we all got to read it.
It really was. You got to figure out where things fall into place.
You got to work a little harder at it, but
yeah. I think you're right though. Like he kind of ended up living the American dream by doing what he loved his whole life.
Exactly, and that's all we can ever ask for, isn't it?
Yeah. I totally agree. That's fantastic.
Okay, so I think that's all we have to talk about Stanley. I mean, we could talk forever, but we only
We really could.
want to take so much of your time. But I did want to know, if you guys had some special occurrences with Stanley. I know a lot of friends of mine were able to see him at a lot of the conventions he's been doing recently, and it was really cool to see that he was still doing that too. I've got so many friends that were posting these pictures, and he had the same look on his face, and the same like neutral colored t-shirt that he was wearing, and it was just so cool to see those. So I wanted to do a shout out to all of you that were able to meet him. If you've got any stories of having met Stanley, I'd love to hear them, and I'm sure Emily would as well.
Yes.
But also, if you had something that you thought Stanley contributed that we didn't touch on, or that we did touch on, I'd love to hear that too. We always love talking nerdy to you, and we love it when you want to talk nerdy to us too.
Well, I do want to tell you guys also, Public House Media has a new web address. It is now www.publichousemedia.org, no longer thephmedia.com. So don't go there anymore. It won't work. Publichousemedia.org. Super simple. Don't have to remember the media or anything like that. Some people have called it that, and it's hilarious. Now it's just the network's name.org. That makes it super simple. You can head there to check out our show page and all the other great shows the Public House Media has to offer, as well as the blog that has been going on for a few months. Emily, I actually write a blog article every so often, so you might see my writing on there. I know our show has been featured in the blog a couple of times. We also have host features that cycle through, and I think I've been featured, Elizabeth has been featured, and Lindsay might be coming up soon.
Cool.
So check the blog out too. And with that, I'm Emily.
And I'm Lindsay. And thanks for getting nerdy with us today on Beauties and Headcanons.